The blizzard came hours earlier than expected, swallowing the valley in white silence. Aria could barely feel her hands as she knelt in the snow, the ceremonial gown clinging to her skin like frozen silk. The wolves formed a perfect circle around her, eyes glinting amber in the dim moonlight. This was the end. The trial of fangs, a sentence every rejected Omega feared more than death itself. When her mate Beta Rowan had spoken the words of rejection before the entire Ironclaw pack, she hadn't cried. She had simply fallen to her knees, numb and cold, knowing there was no mercy left in him. She was too quiet, too small, too broken, for an Omega. The law demanded that such weakness be tested before the moon. If the wolves attacked, she would die. If they spared her, she would live in exile. Aria lowered her gaze to the snow. She refused to meet the gleam of their fangs. She could already feel them shifting, the air thick with the scent of blood and challenge. The world narrowed to her heartbeat, to the hollow thrum of despair in her chest. Then the growling stopped. A strange stillness swept through the clearing, sharp, absolute. Every wolf froze, tails tucked low, heads bowing as though the wind itself had turned to stone. The air grew colder, heavier. And then she felt him, before she even saw him. A figure emerged from the storm's heart. Tall. Silent. Wrapped in a dark cloak that shimmered like shadow caught in moonlight. His eyes, silver as molten frost, fixed on her. The Alpha King. No one from her pack had ever seen him, not in person. He ruled the Northern Territories, a being of myth and command, said to make entire packs kneel with a single word. Now, every wolf around her lay flat in the snow. He stepped forward, each stride measured, deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was a low command that vibrated through her bones. Stand! Aria obeyed before she even realized she had moved. He stopped in front of her, eyes sharp, unreadable. Who cast you to die? She swallowed hard. Rowan of the Ironclaw pack. Your mate? He was. I was not strong enough. Silence. The words struck like thunder. But instead of fear, warmth rippled through her. His gaze softened, only slightly. You are not weak, he murmured. You were bound to the wrong wolf. Aria blinked, breath trembling. Then who? The Alpha King's hand rose, fingertips brushing the side of her throat. The world exploded in silver light. A bond, ancient and electric, snapped into place between them. Aria gasped, her knees nearly giving way. She felt him. His strength. His heartbeat. His power pulsing through the air like a living storm. Impossible. The bond had been broken. She'd been rejected. Unless she'd never belonged to Rowan at all. The king's lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. You are mine, he said softly. You always have been. No one moved. Even the storm seemed to listen. The Alpha King stopped within arm's reach, the silver in his eyes bright as hoarfrost. Aria felt the bond hum like a taut string between them, new, impossible, absolute. Around the circle, Ironclaw wolves lowered their heads to the snow. The enforcers who had prowled closest to her belly crawled backward, throats exposed in primal submission. Bootsteps crunched behind the line of wolves. Beta Rowan stalked from the trees with Alpha Yarrick at his shoulder. Both shifted to human form as the king's gaze lifted. Yarrick, a broad, scarred alpha, dropped to a knee so fast the impact sent powder blooming. Your Majesty, he rasped. We were observing the old law. The old law, the king repeated softly, and every Ironclaw spine stiffened. Where an Omega is thrown to teeth for a failure that was never hers. Rowan swallowed. She is unfit, my king. Her wolf is bound, the king said, the word quiet and lethal. Not broken. Aria's pulse hammered. Bound? To what? To who? The king did not look away from Rowan. You spoke rejection over an Omega who was never yours. You offered her to death to hide your cowardice. Rowan flinched but kept his head bowed. I acted within pack rights. Pack rights and where my law begins, the king said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Hear this, Ironclaw. The trial of fangs is ended. Any alpha who orders it again will be stripped and sent from my borders as a rogue. A susurrus of shock moved through the watching wolves. Alpha Yarrick pressed his forehead to the snow. We obey, my king! Only then did the king turn to Aria. His hand lifted, palm open, a command and an invitation braided together. Come! Her muscles obeyed the way breath obeys the lungs. She stood, legs shaking, and placed her fingers in his. Warmth rushed up her arm, the bond steadied like an anchor dropping into bedrock. Rowan made a desperate sound. She bears our mark. The king's glance cut him to silence. She bears mine. They walked from the killing field as if leaving a ruined season behind. The king, Caelan, someone whispered his name like a vow, moved through the trees with Aria at his side while Ironclaw cleared a path by instinct more than thought. Snow stung her cheeks. The cloak he set around her shoulders was heavy with heat and the scent of smoke and pine. Omega, the word had been a sentence her entire life. Beside a king, it sounded like a title. At the ridge, torches flared. A dark convoy waited, sled runners and armored SUVs fitted for winter passes. Caelan helped her into the rear cabin and followed, the door sealing out the blizzard. The vehicle purred to life, heat spilling from vents. Aria's teeth chattered as sensation crept back into her hands. You felt it, he said. Not a question. I don't understand it. Her voice was hoarse. The bond should have died when Rowan's claim was false. Caelan's eyes traced her face as if memorizing what the storm had tried to erase. Some Omegas are Linares marked. Born with a deeper tether to the moon. When that power is suppressed, the wolf withdraws. It looks like weakness. It is survival. Linares. She echoed, touching the small crescent charm beneath her gown. Grand's last gift. My grandmother used that word. She hid you well. A flicker of respect moved across the king's controlled features. But the moment Ironclaw called blood to snow, your tether surged. I felt it across 3 valleys. You felt me? His mouth curved, the barest thaw of winter. I could have found you in 1,000 storms. Silence stretched, steady as breath. Aria wrapped the cloak closer. What happens now? Now you come home, Caelan said simply. To Frostwatch. To the Northern Crown. You will eat. Sleep. Warm. Then we wake your wolf the right way. He paused. An Ironclaw will unlearn what it never should have taught. Rowan? The name tasted of old humiliation and cold fear. Will answer to his alpha, Caelan said, and the king in him looked back at the White Knight with a promise that was not mercy. Frostwatch rose from the spine of the north like a fortress grown from mountain bone, tiered battlements, moon-carved arches, banners snapping in a wind that smelled of ice and iron. The convoy swept through gates taller than trees. Pack sentries bowed low as the king stepped out and offered Aria his hand again, as if the first time had never ended. Warmth wrapped her inside, firelight on stone, rugs thick as moss, the hush of attendants who moved like snowfall. A healer with pale braids and steady eyes introduced herself as Mira and checked Aria's pulse, her temperature, the bruises already blooming along her knees. You'll mend, Mira said kindly. Omegas are built of quiet steel. Aria slept for a day and a half. When she woke, food waited: broth, black bread, cloud-soft cheese, sweet tea steamed with herbs that tasted like night air and orange peel. She ate everything. And when she set the cup down, Caelan was in the doorway, stillness wrapped around him like a cloak. Walk? He asked. They stepped into a private courtyard where the snow had been brushed into neat rings around smooth, practiced stones. The moon stood thin and high. Caelan faced her across the central circle. Suppression kept you alive, he said. But it lied to you about what you are. We will unwind it with care. How? We begin with breath. With anchor. He lifted a hand and she felt the bond brighten. Hold to me. Reach inward, not for power, not yet, but for the door between you and her. Aria closed her eyes. The world sharpened, The trace of wood smoke in Caelan's hair, the grit of frost underfoot, the slow arrow of her own inhale. Beneath it, a quiet place. A door. She knocked. Something answered. Heat slid through her ribs like a candle-catching wick. A low, reverent sound left Caelan's throat. Good. Open it a finger width. Aria obeyed. Light moved under her skin, silver bleeding to her palms. Her canines pressed. Her hearing widened until she could count the feathers of a bird landing 2 rooftops away. Panic kicked. Too much. Too fast. Anchor, Caelan said, stepping forward, hands bracketing her shoulders. Omega, breathe. Send the overflow into me. She did. Power flowed across the bond in a bright current, routed and returned, steadying. The fear loosened. That, he murmured. Again. They worked until the moon slid and the stars blinked cold. By the end, Aria could open the door without being swallowed by it. She stood straighter. The air tasted sharper. The word Omega sat differently in her bones. Tomorrow, Caelan said. We had teeth. Ironclaw arrived on the 3rd day, penitent, pared down, and cold-faced with consequence. The great hall pulsed with wolf energy, alphas from border packs, lieutenants with scarred knuckles, elders smelling of cedar and winterberries. Aria stood on a balcony above with Mira at her side, a slim figure in a grey tunic, the king's cloak folded over her shoulders like a dawn. Caelan entered to a low thunder of bows. He took the dais without flourish, a king by gravity more than ceremony. Alpha Yarrick, he said. Yarrick stepped forward, throat bared. Ironclaw answers. The trial of fangs? Ended in our lands? Yarrick said, voice rough with a truth that cost him. Under king's law. And the beta who invoked it? Rowan was already on his knees. He looked smaller without the pack around him, younger and emptier. He did not look at Aria. Speak, Caelan said. I claimed a weakness that was my own fear. Rowan forced out. I dishonored our Omega and my Alpha. I submit to judgment. Caelan's gaze did not waver. You will not die for your ignorance, he said, and the hall exhaled as one. You will live with it. Stripped to trainee rank. You will serve under Frostwatch captains and learn how a pack protects its Omegas. Any step out of line, and I send you beyond the border to consider the cost under the cold. Rowan bowed until his forehead touched stone. Caelan turned to the hall. Hear now the crown's law. An Omega's worth is not measured in the decibel of her voice or the size of her shift. Any Alpha who uses tradition to hide cruelty will meet me personally. A murmur rose, fierce and relieved. Myra's hand found Aria's. Do you hear them? The healer whispered. How many waited for someone to say it aloud? Aria swallowed. I hear. Caelan looked up, and for a beat the king let the man look through. Pride warmed the silver of his eyes. The bond hummed like a vow. Training deepened into ritual. Mornings began with breath and anchor, then movement. Low stances on snow-slick stone, balance drills along a beam, short sprints that taught her where her new strength ended, and where discipline had to begin. Afternoons, Mira taught pack law, moon cycles, the quiet codes of Omega authority, how to de-escalate a ranked challenge with 3 words and a look, how to order an Alpha to stand down without raising a hand. Evenings were for the door. Open, Caelan would say, and Aria would, letting the Linares light trace her bones. Close, and the glow would gutter to embers, her pulse settling into human rhythm. It was a dance, Omega and Wolf, Alpha and King, until her body learned the steps. One night, when the courtyard was empty and the snow had polished itself to mirror, Aria took the crescent charm from her throat. The tiny silver disc had been Gran's, and Gran's before that. She pressed it into her palm until the edges bit. My grandmother said this keeps the moon where it can't be stolen, she told Caelan quietly. I thought it was a story. Stories are the way truth survives when law turns against it, he said. What was her name? Sylvie. The word carried warmth into the cold. She made a warrior out of a whisper, the king said. I owe her. Aria looked up sharply. You don't know me. No, he agreed. I choose you. A pause, gentler than breath. There is difference. The bond dipped, a slow, certain tide. Aria didn't answer with words. She opened the door a little wider and let him feel her gratitude, her fear, the burning stitch of hope sewing itself into place. He closed his eyes. Good, he whispered. Again. News of the crown's decree moved faster than ravens. Packs who had buried their omegas behind caution came forward. Letters arrived, some inked with thanks, some with old anger waking to light. Caelan answered every one with a king's patience. Aria watched the way he carried power, never as threat, always as weight he was willing to hold. Her own strength found shape. She learned partial shift, wolf eyes in human face, claws without bones breaking, a growl that could still the air without spilling into violence. She practiced sensing the field of wolves around her, the low thunder of alphas, the bright flares of scouts, the steady hum of omegas like hearthstones in winter rooms. Again, Caelan would say, and she would reach outward with Linaris light until she could count the sentries on the east wall without sight. One afternoon, as pale sun burned a hole in the clouds, a messenger stumbled through the gate with frost in his lashes. Blood Pine, he gasped. Alpha Merrick. He's riding hard with 20 at his back. He says the king has trespassed on pack rights. Of course he does, Caelan said calmly, already moving. Merrick sells obedience to the highest bidder. Tradition is his excuse. He looked at Aria. Stay close. I'm not a glass charm, she said, heat threading her voice. A corner of his mouth lifted. No. You're the blade inside it. They met Merrick in the outer yard under iron sky. The blood pine wolves were hard men with hunger in their eyes, hoarse sweat and arrogance stinging the air. Merrick dismounted, broad and loud. Caelan, he barked, no title. You make laws in my house now? Caelan did not descend the steps. I make laws in my realm. You weaken alphas by coddling omegas. You mistake protection for weakness, the king said. Common error among cowards. Snarls rumbled. A hot, reckless thrill rose in Aria's chest, and with it, light too bright, too sharp. Anchor, Caelan murmured without looking at her. Aria breathed, sent the surge down the bond, steadied. My king, she said softly. Let me speak. Caelan's head tilted, eyes silvering. He stepped aside. Aria faced Merrick. I am the Omega you think should have bled, she said. I didn't. I won't. And under the king's law, none of mine will either. Merrick laughed, all teeth. The Omega speaks. She commands, Caelan corrected, and the yard shifted around the word like metal finding magnet. Merrick lunged first, because men like him always do. Not at Caelan, that would have required a will to die, but toward Aria, the soft target. He moved quick for such mass, claws flashing, a strike meant to frighten, to draw blood, to prove a point. Aria was already moving. The door opened, not wide, just enough. Lights slid to her hands, her stance dropped, breath lined up with the world. She caught Marek's wrist mid-arc and redirected the power of his swing past her hip, the way Mira had drilled into her bones. His momentum betrayed him. He stumbled 2 steps, surprised animal sound breaking from his throat. He came again, teeth bared. She pivoted under, raked his ribs with half-shifted claws, not deep enough to maim, deep enough to teach. The yard went silent but for the wet hiss of Marek's breath. Enough, Caelan said, voice like the edge of winter. Another step and you crawl home without a pack. Marek's gaze flicked between them, king and Omega, anchor and blade. He spat red into the snow. This isn't finished. It is, Caelan said, calm as a closed book. On my land, by my law, it is. He looked to the Bloodpine escort. Choose now, a king who keeps your children safe, or an alpha who sells fear as strength. 3 of Marek's men bowed where they stood. 2 more hesitated, then followed. Marek's jaw worked like he was chewing ice. He backed away, wolf simmering just under skin. Caelan didn't move until Bloodpine rode out of sight. Then he turned to Aria. He didn't say I told you to stay close or you could have been hurt, he said quietly. You measured the room and chose the cut that changed it. Aria's knees realized they were knees. She let out a shaky laugh. I didn't throw up. That feels like a victory. His mouth warmed. I've led alphas who did. Mira, hovering at the arch, blew out a breath she'd been holding since the first lunge. Well, that will echo. It should, Caelan said. He glanced at the reddening scratches on Marek's fleeing trail. Let it carry. Winter softened its grip, trading knives for needles. Word of Bloodpine's public checks sprinted the borders. Some alphas bristled, more exhaled. Aria received letters from Omegas who had only ever signed their names in whispers. I told my mate I wanted a voice at council. I pulled our smallest to the fire instead of to the ring. I believe you when you say I am not a mistake. Belief is a thing that breeds. Frostwatch held the moon's turning, a crown gathering older than the crown itself. Wolves arrived from river clans and tundra runs, from seacliff holds where storms write their names on stone. The great halls shimmered with banners and breath, with the electricity that comes when too many predators agree not to bite. Aria walked at Caelan's right. Not behind. Not half a pace back. Right. A murmur moved before them, curiosity, challenge, recognition. She kept her shoulders level and her senses open, tasting the field the way he had taught her. 3 alphas leaning too far forward. An omega near the west pillar holding herself too small. A young warrior so nervous he smelled like lightning. Caelan spoke to petitioners for hours, ruling on grazing rights and border disputes with the same attention he gave to questions of life and exile. When the hall emptied to the hum of feasting, he and Aria took the eastern balcony above the frostlit valley. Lanterns bobbed in the dark like slow stars. You've carried this alone a long time, Aria said. He leaned on the stone. Kings are never alone. It's the cruelest trick. You know that isn't what I mean. Silver eyes softer now. I do. She let the bond loosen and then press, the way a hand says here. You don't have to hold every wall at once. I'm learning the load. You are not a shield, he said. No, Aria agreed. I'm the one who hands you water and tells you when to set the shield down before it grows into your bones. His laugh was quiet and incredulous, like a man who had forgotten what that muscle was for. He turned, lifting a hand to her cheek in a touch that could have been prayer if not for how human it felt. The kiss that followed wasn't a blaze. It was a hearth, steady heat with a bright heart to it, a thing that could last a winter and then another. When they broke, breath misted between them like a promise spoken to the cold. Aria, he said. Just her name. It was enough. Peace in the north is never a season, it's a moment balanced on a blade. The moment ended at dawn 3 days after the moon's turning when ravens hit the tower windows in frantic 3s and 5s. Caelan was already armored when Aria reached the war room. Maps covered the table like flayed geography. Captains ringed the edges with hard mouths. Mira stood at the far wall, eyes winter bright. Reports? Aria asked, sliding into the space at Caelan's right. 3 raids along the southeast braid, Captain Ivor said. Border packs say they're rogues, but they move too clean for wild. They strike supply lines, not homes. They want us hungry. Whose colors? Caelan asked. None, Ivor said. That's the point. Aria let Linara's sense unfurl along the map lines. There, a quiet wrongness, too coordinated to be chance. Not Merrick. Not his flavor of violence. This smelled like coin and patience. Hired wolves, she said. Someone with a ledger and an old bruise. Names on that ledger are many, Caelan murmured. Mira stepped forward. Whoever pays them shares a bigger aim, force Frostwatch to pull troops inward. Starve your outliers. Make the law look thin where the road gets long. Then we thicken it, Aria said before she could think to measure the room. Split our strength in a way they don't expect. Caelan's brow notched, not disapproval, attention. Go on. Send alphas to hunt alphas, and omegas to hold the towns. A ripple of disbelief darted the circle. Aria held their eyes. You've all seen what happens when a frightened village meets a hungry pack with no one to read the air. An omega can settle a fuse with a word. Put one on every supply run. Pair them with captains who listen. We keep the lines warm, not just guarded. Silence stretched. Then Captain Ivor nodded, slow and then faster. I've watched Mira cool more hotheads than my whole unit. Mira snorted. Because you boys think with your teeth. Caelan looked at Aria like a puzzle that had revealed the gear behind its face. Do it, he said to his captains. Pairs. Today. When the room thinned to orders and motion, Aria rested her palms on the map's edge. There's more, she said softly. I feel it. Something under the raids. A hand that doesn't care who we punish as long as we tire. Caelan's jaw set, a quiet, lethal line. The hand will show, he said. And when it does, King and Omega answer together. Aria nodded. The word together rang through her chest like steel struck true. She closed her eyes for a beat, reached for the door, and opened it just enough to light the room. Ready? He asked. She looked up. Always, my king. The raids didn't stop, they shifted. What had been single strikes became mirrored assaults, hitting supply outposts and healing caravans on opposite sides of the border at the same hour. Whoever led them knew Frostwatch's rhythm, its timing, even its patrol rotations. Traitors, some whispered. Spies, others hissed. But Caelan's orders were clear, no accusations without proof. The crown would not rot itself with suspicion. Aria rode at dawn with a convoy bound for the southern ridge, where the river froze in spirals of blue glass. She was paired with Captain Ivor, his scent all pine and iron, his respect hard-earned. Beside them trotted a dozen warriors, half in wolf form, half in human, their breath ghosting the air. The road twisted through pine shadows and brittle silence. Then movement. Too fast, too quiet. Ambush! Ivor barked. Wolves burst from the treeline, grey pelts streaked with ash, armor scavenged from northern corpses. Aria felt the surge before the attack fully broke, the shift in the wind that warned of blood. Her Linaris sense screamed through her body. Shields! She shouted, voice ringing with command she hadn't known she possessed. Her power flared silver, snapping across the front line like a barrier of moonlight. Claws met light instead of flesh. Sparks flew where Fang hit energy. Ivor lunged forward, blades singing. The battle was chaos, snow, growls, metal. Aria's pulse merged with the storm. Every time her energy waned, she anchored to the bond, Caelan. She could feel his awareness spike across distance, his answering presence like a hand steadying her from miles away. A wolf broke through her line, massive, scarred, eyes pharaoh-red. He crashed into her, jaws snapping. Instinct took over. She spun, channeling the power through her arm. Her palm met his chest, and light exploded. The rogue flew backward, smoking fur and ice. Then silence. When the last of them fled, limping into the woods, the convoy stood breathing hard in the afterglow of battle. Snowflakes melted on blood and light. Ivor sheathed his blades. If anyone doubted the king's Omega, they won't now. Aria shook not from fear, but from the sheer rush of what had just moved through her. They knew where we'd be, she said. Ivor nodded grimly. Aye. Someone's feeding them routes. Her eyes darkened. Then we hunt the Whisper. That night, back at Frostwatch, Aria reported straight to the war room. The table was empty except for Caelan, his armor still dusted with frost from his own patrol. When she entered, his head lifted, relief flashed so raw it softened the steel of him. You're hurt, he said. Only tired, she answered. We held the ridge. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, hands finding her shoulders, checking, searching, needing to feel that she was whole. I felt you, he murmured. Through the bond. The surge almost broke the wards. I anchored, she said quietly. Just like you taught me. For a moment neither spoke. Only the wind hissed through the cracks of the old stone. Then she drew a steadying breath. They knew we'd be there, Caelan. Someone close is passing information to the raiders. The king's expression cooled into pure command. Within the palace? Yes. The timing was too precise. He nodded once. We find them quietly. I'll call no councils. Let them believe the storm has passed. She studied his face, the way light caught the edges of his silver eyes. And if the traitor wears a crown? He smiled faintly. Then the crown burns, and the king wears truth instead. Aria almost laughed, but her exhaustion swallowed it. She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they stood, how his scent, pine, smoke, cold rain, wrapped around her like home. You never doubted me, she said. Not once, he replied. I saw your strength before you did. She wanted to speak, to tell him how his faith had become her heartbeat, but words would have been too small. So she let the bond say it for her, let her warmth reach across it like light slipping through stone. Caelan's gaze softened. Rest, Moonfire, he murmured. Tomorrow, we start turning shadows inside out. Morning came with sleet and suspicion. Aria woke early, her instincts prickling. The fortress felt different, quieter, watching itself. Hallways that once hummed with laughter now whispered. Even the wolves pacing the gates had their hackles half raised. Mira met her outside the library. Something's off, the healer said softly. 2 scouts from the northern post didn't report in last night. Vanished? More like silenced. Myra's mouth was grim. No signs of struggle. Just gone. Aria's chest tightened. The traitor wasn't waiting, they were moving. She and Caelan convened privately in his map chamber, the air between them alive with focus. We traced the pattern of each raid, she said, spreading marked stones across the table. Who rode, who stayed behind, who gained from every loss. It was Caelan who spotted it first, an overlap, subtle but damning. Captain Orin, he said, tapping the southern mark. He's assigned to every convoy that was hit, always surviving without injury, always first to report. Orin? Aria frowned. He's one of your oldest men. Which is why no one would question him, Caelan said. Until now. They didn't summon guards. Didn't announce a trial. Instead, at dusk, Aria walked alone through the barracks, letting her senses stretch like roots through the walls. She found Orin in the armory, hunched over a crate, sealing scrolls with a foreign crest. Her wolf growled softly inside her mind. Orin, she said, stepping into the torchlight. He froze, hand hovering over the wax seal. My lady, he said, too calm. You're packing for a long journey. Orders, he lied. Aria's power flared, silver ripples spilling into the air. Funny, she whispered. I don't remember giving any. He turned, snarl twisting human lips, and in that instant she saw it. The mark burned into his collarbone, not a pack sigil, but a rogue brand. Before he could shift, she struck, moonlight in her palm, sharp as steel. The energy hit his chest, slamming him into the wall. Scrolls burst across the floor like feathers. Footsteps thundered behind her, Caelan, drawn by the bond's surge. Orin's mouth filled with blood. You don't understand, he rasped. He's coming for both of you. Who? Caelan demanded. But Orin only smiled, red and broken. The Shadow Alpha doesn't kneel to kings. Then his eyes glazed, and he was gone. Aria's heartbeat slowed, each thud echoing with the same truth. The raids were never about territory. They were about her. The word Shadow Alpha clung to the walls of Frostwatch like frostbite. No one said it above a whisper, but everyone felt its weight. Legend said he was once a crowned Alpha exiled for treachery, one who had refused to bow, who built an army from the cast-offs of broken packs and thrived in the dark between kingdoms. Caelan stood at the balcony that night, snow streaming past the torches. Aria joined him quietly, the wind tugging at her cloak. He's not a myth, she said softly. Orin wasn't lying. I know, Caelan replied. I felt the echo in his words. Whoever this Shadow Alpha is, He's connected to you. Her pulse stumbled. To me? He knew you'd awaken. He wanted to draw you out, force the moon-blessed bloodline into the open. You're not just his target, Aria. You're his key. She looked up, fear sharpening the silver in her eyes. Then he'll come here. Caelan's jaw hardened. Let him. Frostwatch has waited centuries for a threat worthy of its walls. He reached for her hand, warm, sure, grounding. The bond thrummed between them, alive with purpose. Whatever he wants from you, Caelan said, he'll have to go through me first. Aria squeezed his fingers once. Then we stand together. For a long moment neither spoke. Only the storm whispered around them, ancient and waiting. The first attack came a week later, just before dawn. A watchtower fell, no warning, no alarm, just the sound of stone cracking under pressure. Aria jolted awake to the flare of the bond, Caelan's voice in her mind like a thunderclap. Stay inside the inner ring. I'm coming to you. But Aria was already moving. She grabbed her cloak and sprinted through the corridors as the fortress shook. Flames licked the eastern wall. Wolves in shadow armor poured through a breach like ink, their eyes burning with unnatural red. At the front of the chaos stood a figure cloaked in black and silver. His hair was white as ash, his stance a mirror of Caelan's power, but colder, hungrier. When his gaze lifted to her, something ancient inside her recoiled. Little Moon, he called across the courtyard. His voice was velvet and venom. I've waited a long time to see the light that should have been mine. Aria froze. Who are you? He smiled, a cruel echo of her king. I am what your alpha could have been if he'd embraced the dark instead of the crown. Caelan's roar broke the air like thunder as he leapt from the ramparts, landing between them. Power rippled outward, the snow around him evaporating in heat. Stay away from her, Caelan warned. The shadow alpha tilted his head. You took what was destined for me, brother. Brother. The word hit like a blade of ice. Aria's breath caught, eyes flicking between them. Two kings, same silver eyes, same impossible strength, one light, one shadow. Dorian, Caelan said quietly. I buried you 10 years ago. You buried my body, Dorian hissed. But not my claim. He raised his hand, and the night itself seemed to rise with him. The moon chooses her vessels. You just stole mine. Before Aria could react, darkness surged across the courtyard like smoke come alive. The two brothers collided with a sound that cracked the sky. Light and shadow met midair, silver and black fire twisting through the storm. The blast sent wolves flying and shattered stone towers like toys. Aria shielded her face as shards rained around her. Caelan's power pulsed through the bond, fierce and bright. She could feel his pain, his focus, his desperate need to keep the darkness from reaching her. But Dorian was stronger than any legend had claimed. Every strike he threw bled hunger, the kind that devoured reason. You don't deserve the crown, he snarled. You don't even deserve her. She's not yours to deserve, Caelan roared. Their power tore the air apart. Aria's instincts screamed, anchor, bond, balance. She focused inward, reaching through the chaos for Caelan's heartbeat. It pulsed faint but steady, tethering her to him even as the courtyard fell into ruin. And then she understood, Dorian wasn't just feeding off his own strength. He was drawing energy from the shadows themselves, leached from every frightened heart in the fortress. If she could cut that thread, she could weaken him. She sprinted toward the center of the courtyard, ignoring the cold bite of stone and smoke. The moon broke through the clouds, casting her shadow long and pale. She spread her hands, feeling the ancient power of the Linares stir. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. The moon answers those who listen, not those who shout. Aria closed her eyes. I am not afraid. Light burst from her body like sunrise through water. The darkness recoiled. Dorian staggered back, shielding his face as silver radiance swept across the battlefield. Every rogue wolf froze mid-charge, the corruption draining from their eyes as Aria's power spread like dawn over the snow. Caelan dropped to one knee, his armor cracked, blood streaking his jaw. Aria! He breathed. You're channeling too much. She met his gaze, the glow in her eyes fierce and clear. I'm not breaking, Caelan. I'm remembering. The moonlight thickened, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. It wasn't wild anymore, it was precise, ancient, alive. She extended one hand toward Dorian. You wanted my power, she said, her voice steady as stone. Now face it. Dorian screamed, shadows thrashing around him, but her light cut through every thread he threw. The ground beneath him cracked, swallowing the darkness that had followed him. Stop! He shouted. You don't know what you're unleashing. Yes, Aria said quietly. I do. With one final surge, she released the full force of her Linares bond. The world exploded in white. When the light faded, the courtyard was silent. The snow had melted to glass where she stood. Dorian lay motionless, his cloak burned away, his eyes dim. Caelan rose slowly, every movement heavy with exhaustion. He crossed to her, cupping her face with trembling hands. You did it, he whispered. Aria's knees buckled. He caught her before she fell. You saved us all. Her vision swam, edges softening into light. We saved each other, she murmured. And then the world went dark. When Aria opened her eyes, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that follows the end of a storm. She lay beneath soft furs that smelled faintly of smoke and pine, her body aching but whole. The last thing she remembered was the explosion of light, the surge of power that had poured through her until it became the night itself. The sound of steady breathing reached her before she turned her head. Caelan sat in a chair beside her bed, still wearing battle-worn clothes, his head bowed, exhaustion shadowing his features. One of his hands was wrapped around hers, as though even in sleep he refused to let go. Caelan, she whispered, her voice fragile. His eyes opened instantly, the silver flaring back to life. You're awake, he breathed, relief softening the sharpness in him. I thought. He stopped himself, as though saying the rest might make it true. Aria managed a faint smile. You should know by now I'm hard to kill. He laughed, quiet, disbelieving, and pressed his forehead against her hand. You didn't just survive, Aria. You ended it. Dorian's forces are scattered. The Shadow Army dissolved with him. Her chest tightened. He's dead? Gone, Caelan said softly. His body turned to ash under your light. Aria exhaled shakily. He said he was your brother. Caelan's eyes dimmed. He was. Once. Before ambition devoured him. He believed the moon's favor was his birthright. When she chose another path, when she chose me, he broke our blood oath and tried to claim the throne. I thought he was dead. Her voice softened. He was hunting me because of that choice. Caelan nodded, grief flickering through his gaze. He thought your bond with me was proof the moon had chosen you to finish what he started. He couldn't understand that the bond wasn't power. It was balance. Aria reached up, brushing her fingers against his cheek. He was wrong, Caelan. The moon didn't choose either of you alone. It chose both of us, to end what began in darkness. The king looked at her for a long time, and for once, the weight of command melted away. Then the prophecy was right, he murmured. The moon blessed one who would awaken the crown and the wolf alike. And she did, Aria said. But not because she was chosen. Because she chose. Caelan's lips curved, slow and reverent. My Omega Queen, he whispered. News of the Shadow Alpha's fall spread faster than any command could contain it. Across the northern territories, packs lit fires on their hills as a sign of unity, a ring of flames stretching from valley to coast. The old fear of Omegas, of difference, began to crumble. Aria stood at the balcony of Frostwatch, wrapped in a cloak the color of moonlight. The horizon was alive with embers. Wolves below howled not in mourning, but in triumph. Mira appeared at her side, her braid glinting in the firelight. They're calling it the night of renewal, she said softly. The night the moon-blessed queen silenced the shadows. Aria flushed. They exaggerate. Maybe, Mira said with a smile. But every story starts that way. Aria looked down at the courtyard below, where children played between banners of silver and blue. The same ground that had once been drenched in blood now shimmered with peace. Behind her, she felt Caelan's presence before he spoke. "They look to you now," he said, voice low. "To what you'll build next?" She turned to him. "We'll build it. A world where no Omega kneels in the snow again. Where power isn't a right, it's a promise." Caelan stepped closer, the bond between them humming like a living thing. "Then we'll start today." He raised his hand, pressing it over her heart. "The old ways are gone. From this moment forward, every pack under the crown will swear by a new oath: equality, protection, and the sanctity of bond. No rank will rule by fear." Aria covered his hand with hers. "And we'll name it after what we fought for." He tilted his head. "What's that?" "Hope." The ceremony that followed was unlike any Frostwatch had ever seen. Under a full moon, wolves from every territory gathered in the great square. The banners of countless packs, once symbols of rivalry, hung side by side in the night air. At the center stood Caelan and Aria, not as ruler and subject, but as equals bound by choice and destiny. Myra's voice carried through the wind. "By the light of the moon, we honor the balance that keeps the world whole. Alpha and Omega, strength and grace, power and peace." Caelan took Aria's hand. "Aria of the moon bless," he said, his voice steady and filled with warmth. "Will you stand beside me, not beneath, not behind, but as queen of the northern crown?" Aria met his gaze, her heart full. "I already do." The crowd erupted in a chorus of howls that shook the mountains. The moon flared brighter, silver light cascading over Frostwatch. As Caelan leaned forward, his mark burned faintly against her skin, not as a brand of ownership, but as a bond of recognition. "Together," he whispered, "we rebuild." Aria smiled. "Together we rise." And when their lips met, the moon itself seemed to pause, bathing them in the light of a new age. From that night onward, the old tales of fear and rejection faded into legend, replaced by a new story, the story of the Omega who faced the wolves and the Alpha King who walked through fire to find her. They ruled not through fear, but through unity. Not with claws, but with conviction. And when the snow returned to the mountains, it fell softly, peaceful, pure, and unbroken. Because the circle that once meant death now meant eternity. Years passed, but Frostwatch never slept. Its towers breathed light now instead of smoke, and where battle drums had once echoed, the music of pack gatherings filled the air. Wolves of every rank mingled freely in the courtyards. The old hierarchies that had ruled by dominance faded into memory. What remained was kinship. Aria walked the ramparts often, the crown of silver thorns resting light on her head. She still preferred boots to jewels, still rose before dawn to train in the courtyard. When young Omega sought her counsel, she would tell them quietly. "Strength doesn't roar. It listens." Caelan ruled beside her, though he often joked that she ruled through him instead. The people loved their king, but they trusted their queen. Together, they had turned Frostwatch into the heart of a new era, the age of the twin crown. One evening, under a pale violet sky, Caelan found her leaning against the balcony rail, gazing toward the horizon where the mountains melted into mist. "You still look for the next storm," he said gently. "I listen for it," Aria corrected. "Peace is quiet. But quiet doesn't always mean safe." He joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "If a storm comes, we'll meet it like we always have, hand in hand." She smiled at that, leaning back against him. "You make it sound simple." "It is," he said. "The moon taught us one truth: the light always returns." Frostwatch became a sanctuary for those without packs. Orphans, rogues, even humans who carried traces of wolf ancestry found welcome there. Mira oversaw the Healer's Wing, now expanded into a network of medical halls across the northern territories. Ivor trained a new generation of peacekeepers, warriors who swore oaths not to conquest, but to protection. Aria founded the Linares Circle, a council of Omegas, Alphas, and Betas who would maintain the laws she and Caelan had written together. Its emblem was not a fawn or a claw, but a crescent moon cupped in open hands. Still, the world beyond the mountains watched with envy and suspicion. Southern emissaries whispered that Frostwatch had grown too powerful, that the moon's blessing could not last forever. Caelan sent envoys of peace, but he also prepared quietly for the day those whispers might become war. One night, as snow drifted beyond the stained glass windows, Aria studied the council's scrolls by candlelight. Caelan entered soundlessly, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. "You've been awake too long," he murmured. "So have you." "I'm a king," he teased. "Insomnia is part of the job." She smiled faintly. "And I'm a queen. My job is to remind the king to sleep before he starts mistaking paranoia for prophecy." He laughed, a sound she never tired of hearing. Then he kissed her temple, whispering, "Prophecy or not, I'd burn the world twice over before I let it take you." Spring came early that year. The snow melted faster, rivers swelling with silver meltwater. Children played in courtyards that once held armies. Life, stubborn and unstoppable, took root again. Aria wandered the village beyond Frostwatch's walls, dressed simply, her cloak hooded. The people recognized her anyway. A baker pressed bread into her hands, a young Omega offered her wildflowers. She thanked them with a warmth that never felt rehearsed. At the square's edge, she found a statue rising, a gift from the Artisans' Guild. It depicted two wolves standing side by side, their forms carved in gleaming marble, one light, one shadow, both facing the same moon. At the base were inscribed words in the old tongue, from division, unity. From silence, song. Aria's throat tightened. For a moment, she felt the faint echo of Dorian's voice in memory, his rage, his ruin. But there was peace in it now. Even his darkness had led them here. When she returned to the castle that night, she found Caelan waiting by the hearth. He looked up as she entered, eyes warm. "You saw it," he said. She nodded. "He's still part of this. The shadow reminds the light what it stands for." Caelan took her hand, twining their fingers. "Then we honor him too. Every scar is a history we chose to survive." Years folded gently into one another. The wolves called Aria Mother of Moonfire, the first of her kind to bridge power and peace without surrendering either. Her bond with Caelan deepened until it felt less like magic and more like breathing. But the moon has a way of testing its children. One night, when a red eclipse crowned the sky, Aria felt a new stirring inside her, a pulse that was not her own. She gasped, reaching for Caelan. His eyes widened as understanding struck. "A heartbeat," he whispered, all breaking his composure. "You're..." She smiled through tears. "We're not just building a kingdom anymore, Caelan. We're building a legacy." For the first time, the mighty Alpha King looked uncertain. "How does one protect a child of the moon?" Aria pressed his hand to her belly. "The same way we protect everything else. Together." That night, the moon turned white again, as if giving its silent blessing. When the child was born, the snow fell in spirals of light. The wolf said it was the moon herself descending to witness the moment. The girl had her father's silver eyes and her mother's quiet strength. They named her Lyra, after the constellation that guides travelers home. From the moment she could walk, Lyra wandered the halls of Frostwatch like a beam of light no shadow could touch. The Pax adored her, but her parents taught her humility above all. "A crown," Aria told her one night, "isn't made of metal. It's made of choice." Lyra would grow to carry that truth farther than any of them could imagine, but that was another story, a story whispered to the pups of Frostwatch on long winter nights. For now peace reigned. The moon rose full and patient above the mountains. Wolves sang not out of grief, but out of joy. And in the quiet after their song, Aria stood beside Caelan on the balcony, their daughter cradled between them. The world below glittered with the light of 1,000 fires, the fires of hope they had kindled together. Caelan's voice was soft as snow. "Do you hear that?" Aria nodded, smiling. "Yes. The sound of a kingdom finally at peace." And for the first time in generations, the North slept beneath a sky without fear. Seasons turned, and the world outside Frostwatch shifted into quiet prosperity. Villages rebuilt, trade routes reopened, and the once feared Northern Crown became a beacon for all wolves seeking refuge from the cruelty of the old world. Aria often found herself watching Lyra play in the same courtyard where she had once stood trembling in snow and fear. Now laughter echoed through the open air, where no wolf knelt in submission anymore. "She reminds me of you," Mira said one afternoon, walking up beside her. The healer's hair had turned silver, though her eyes still gleamed with warmth. "Fearless. Curious. Too stubborn for her own good." Aria smiled softly. "Then the moon truly has a sense of humor." Mira chuckled. "She'll inherit a kingdom of peace. And when that day comes, she'll know how it was built, through fire and frost, by a queen who refused to bow." Aria turned her face toward the pale sun. "I didn't build it alone," she said quietly. Caelan's strength carved the walls, but it was every Omega who dared to lift her head that filled them. From across the courtyard, Lyra waved. Behind her, Caelan stood watching, his expression proud, softened by time but never diminished. Aria's heart swelled with something deeper than happiness, something timeless. A knowing that her life, her struggle, had meant more than survival. It had meant change. Winter returned once more, gentler than before. The wind still howled across the mountains, but it carried songs now instead of cries. The great library of Frostwatch, once filled with battle plans and laws of dominance, now overflowed with stories, journals, and teachings of balance. Aria spent her evenings there, recording everything that had come before, wanting the world to remember not the war, but the healing that followed. One night Caelan found her asleep over parchment, ink staining her fingers. He smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Still trying to write the entire history of wolves?" he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open. "If I don't, someone else will. And they'll forget the details, the silence, the fear, the change." Caelan sat beside her, taking the quill from her hand. "Let them remember this instead, that peace was made possible not by power, but by mercy." She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you think they'll understand, Caelan? That strength isn't in claws or ranks, but in choosing to protect those who can't fight back." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "They will. Because they'll grow up under your light." And in the window beside them, the moon glowed, full and pale, its reflection spilling across the parchment like liquid silver. Years bled softly into decades. Frostwatch aged, its walls layered with ivy and memory. Lyra grew into her inheritance, graceful, fierce, and wise beyond her years. The people called her the Dawnborn, a symbol of the balance her parents had forged. Aria and Caelan ruled less as monarchs now, and more as guides, mentors to the young leaders who had risen under their protection. The council chambers that once heard arguments now rang with laughter and ideas. On the eve of Lyra's coronation, Aria stood at the same balcony where she had once knelt as a condemned Omega, snow falling soft as breath. Caelan joined her, the faint lines of age tracing his temples. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The battles. The fire." He shook his head, eyes on the horizon. "I miss the reason we fought. But not the fight itself." Aria turned toward him, studying the man who had once been legend, now simply her home. "You kept your promise," she said. "No Omega ever faced the circle again." He smiled. "And you kept yours. You taught a kingdom how to listen." They stood in silence, hands entwined, watching the torches of the courtyard below as Lyra prepared to take her place before the people. When the moon rose to its height, Aria whispered, "The circle's unbroken now, Caelan. But not of death, of legacy." The coronation was held beneath a sky strewn with stars. Every pack from the farthest forest to the edge of the sea gathered under Frostwatch's banners. Wolves sang not of power or conquest, but of unity and grace. Lyra stepped forward, wearing a crown of woven silver branches, simple, luminous, eternal. When she looked up at the moon, the same ancient light that had guided her parents shone down, full and patient. Aria stood beside Caelan, their hands linked. Time had softened them but not diminished their fire. "We did it," she murmured. Caelan smiled faintly. "No. You did. I only followed where your heart led." A hush fell as Lyra knelt before them. "Mother! Father! I swear to carry what you built, to lead with mercy, not might. To guard every life the moon touches." Aria's eyes glistened. "Then rise, my daughter. Rise as the queen of the new dawn." Lyra stood, the moonlight crowning her in silver fire, and the entire kingdom howled as one, a song of promise echoing across the mountains. The sound washed through Aria's soul. She turned her face toward the snow as it began to fall again, soft, endless, familiar. It was the same snow that had once seen her on her knees. The same wind that had carried the Alpha King to her side. Now it carried peace. And in that final moment, beneath the eternal moon, Aria smiled. The rejected Omega who once knelt to die had risen to change the world. And the world would never forget her name,